All right, I'll let you
All
send
right.
it live and I'll
Okay.
mute myself.
All right. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Barbara Foster of ICC, welcoming you to our second quarter review of changes and things that you may want to know for the current regulatory systems regarding transport of hazardous materials, dangerous goods, and the hazard communication standards in North America. So just a little review. If you're not familiar with ICC, we are a premier supplier of supplies for hazardous materials transport and hazard communication here in North America. We supply many products such as transportation labels and placards, packaging for dangerous goods and hazardous materials, publications, custom printing if you need that, computer programs for things such as shipping papers, and also we can help you with your labels and safety data sheets for OSHA and WMIS. So please keep us in mind, and as you can see at the bottom of the screen, our website is www.thecompliancecenter.com. So please consider checking us out. Myself, I've been with ICC for a horrendously long period of time, past my 35th anniversary recently, dealing with primarily with the transport of dangerous goods or hazardous materials regulations, and also with the hazard communication standards in both Canada and the United States. Now, you may have noticed, for example, that you are muted. We've got a large group of people here today. So if you need to ask a question, we have Pam and Kelly who are assisting me, and they will be monitoring the question and answer icon. So if you look at the top of your control panel, you see a little icon that it's got a question mark on it. It says Q&A. Just click on that. And at the bottom, if you're looking for where to type in your information, it will be at the bottom of the Q&A box. So you can just type in your question. Don't forget to hit send. Because it doesn't get sent automatically, but when it shows up, it will be put in the queue. And at the end of the session, we'll go through all of those that Pam and Kelly have not been able to answer for me, and we'll go through them and make sure that we can answer them to the best of our ability. So please, if you do have any questions about anything, please just feel free to use the Q&A option, and we will keep track of them there. So our agenda today is we're going to start with the US DOT, and particularly with the Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, their updates to 49 CFR, the hazardous materials regulations. Then we'll shift to Canada, and in Canada we'll look at the Canadian TDG system, what's going on there. A look at the international regulations. Not a lot happening here because we are just kind of in the summer lull before the next, what they call UN biennium, when there's going to be a whole new UN book come out with following changes for international regulations. Then we're going to look at hazard communication for workplace chemicals with OSHA in the United States and Health Canada. And we will do a little reminder about the North American Emergency Response Guidebook, which the newest edition has just been published. So first, we'll go to Washington, take a look at the US DOT and the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. And quite a big change has come out over the past couple of months. We have HM 215Q. It is an amendment docket dealing with international harmonization. with the UN and related regulations. So this has come out as a final rule, which means it is official. It is not just a proposal anymore. There's the URL, and I believe that Pam and Kelly will be putting the URLs in the chat so you can keep track of them as time goes, as we go through them, so you don't have to frantically try and copy these down. Then we have, it was published April 10th. You can start complying immediately, but the effective date was May 10th, which again has passed. So we are now in the area where you may start complying with this final rule now, although there will be a transition period. And there were 2 corrections issued. I guess after they published it, they realized there were a few typos and things they had to address. So one came out on May 9th, was published in the Federal Register, and the next one on May 13th. So these are fairly short, but just indicating some minor corrections that had been noted after the first publication of the final rule. So what this is about is to try and make it easier for US shippers to ship internationally by trying to match as far as feasible what's going on in the international standards. So from the rule, it says adoption of the regulatory amendments in this final rule will facilitate transportation efficiency while maintaining the high safety standard currently achieved under the hazardous materials regulations. At least that was what the DOT claims. Let's see whether they are true to their word. They will be incorporating and reflecting the UN recommendations on the transport of dangerous goods, 22nd revised edition. And yes, they have come out since then with the 23rd. This change did take some time to get approved, so there was a bit of a lag. We'll also reference for air transport the International Civil Aviation Technical Instructions on the Safe Transport of Dangerous Goods by Air, the 2023 to 2024 edition, and the International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code, Amendment 42-22. Again, those 2 are the current effective regulations for international air and ocean transport. So the updated versions will be referenced in the regulations, and the changes have been primarily based on these revisions. So let's just take a look. This is really quite a large amendment, although it deals more with a lot of smaller things that need to be changed rather than a whole complete revision of the system. The UN recommendations really are at a point now where most of the changes are more like fine-tuning than complete new ideas that they're bringing in. But the US regulations have to be updated, or else these things can become minor but very annoying hindrances to imports and exports. So some of the things that they're addressing in this final rule, some updates to the list of hazardous materials, the hazardous materials table, some new entries or minor corrections or amendments to some of the entries, and some updates and changes to special provisions, which are rules that apply to certain entries in this table. They did a fair amount of work on updating standards for pressure vessels that meet UN specifications, such as cylinders. Right now, most cylinders, I would say, in Canada and the United States are approved to national standards, but there are UN certified cylinders. There is a spec for cylinders in the UN recommendations, and if everybody started using it, it would eventually make international transport of pressure vessels a lot easier. So they have started to incorporate more of these UN specifications and making them easier to interchange with national standards from the DOT. They've done some updates for hazardous materials in articles, particularly when the hazardous materials are in quantities that exceed limited quantities. There's been, for some time, there's been rules about shipping an article, such as a piece of equipment, that contains small amounts of hazardous materials, but sometimes you have equipment that contains larger amounts. So the UN has done some work on creating better descriptions and ways of dealing with that, and that will be reflected in this final rule. As always, lithium batteries, they're nearly always there, a highlight of any international harmonization. They're one of the few types of hazmat that I would say we're still at the stage where you can't say, oh, if you just follow the regulations exactly, you will not have any problems. There's still some issues, even for people who follow the regulations very, very meticulously. So there's always some tweaks being done at the UN to try and make them safer. And the US had been getting a little bit behind the times. So when dealing with low-powered, or what the DOT calls small lithium batteries, there have been some revisions to reflect the International Air Standard from ICAO. There've been some changes at ICAO a few years ago, and they're just getting these changes, a matching provision put into the hazmat regulations now. There were some points that the DOT decided not to adopt, which is, of course, their right, on the grounds that they weren't 100% sure they were safe or would work effectively in the United States, or maybe they just felt they needed some further thought and research. One is the UN has been working on creating standards for what they call fiber reinforced plastic portable tanks, abbreviated FRPs, or fiber reinforced plastic. The UN has accepted those in some cases. They are a newer type of packaging, but the UN feels that they may be safe enough in some cases. The DOT, though, feels that we really need to look at them in more detail for longer to make sure that they are safe. So they have not been generally adopted in this final rule, although there is a provision that says if they are transiting through a single port area, say they are loaded on a ship, they are not to be delivered into the United States, but they might, either the ship comes in and then leaves, or it offloads and moves to a different ship in the same port, that would be acceptable. So there are provisions for transport of these FRPs within a single port area if they're not moving into the United States proper from the port. The UN had made some changes in their terminology regarding pressure vessels. You can find these changes in the current UN and the International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code. The DOT has not yet adopted these terminology changes. And one thing that is a little bit annoying for American shippers and shippers into the United States is that there are some significant differences in the classification and standards for aerosols. So something might be classified, say, as an aerosol in Europe or in Canada, and yet in the United States, it would not be classified as an aerosol and would have different packaging standards. The UN had been making some changes regarding aerosol classification, but the DOT has decided that rather than trying to do it piecemeal, they really need to step back and look at aerosols as a whole. Is there any reason, from a safety standpoint, why the US has to have unique standards? Is it keeping Americans safer, or is it just they are different, but not really all that much better than the international standards? And hopefully at some point we can come up with a standard that will meet both US and international requirements, but it's a more in-depth piece of work than they felt they could do in this final rule. Going back to the lithium batteries, some changes on the lithium batteries. Now, in the United States, they have picked up this requirement for providing a test summary when you distribute lithium batteries. So if you're buying lithium batteries or getting them from a distributor or a supplier, if you wish, you can request a copy of the test report summary to verify that your batteries have been tested, they are legal and safe. There have been some debate about this, whether this is really necessary, whether it's helpful, but they did manage to convince the DOT that in one special case, a test summary was not really going to be necessary, and that's when you're shipping equipment that the only lithium batteries installed in it are button cells. Those are the little tiny round ones, and they are so small that when they are in equipment, the risk is considered to be basically negligible. So if I was shipping something like a car door opener, key fob, with 1 or 2 button cells installed in there, I would not have to provide this written test report. I would require still for other types of lithium batteries. It's not a button cell, this would not apply. And if the button cells are not in equipment, they will still need a testing report on request. Again, if you're wondering, where do I get this testing report if I'm a battery supplier? It comes from where you got the batteries and should trace back to the original manufacturer. Another thing is with the rechargeable lithium-ion batteries, they're classified as high or low powered, or the DOT calls them small versus large. But again, it's the amount of power in them that is small or large, not the size of the batteries by dimensions. But small lithium batteries were supposed to have their watt-hour rating marked on the outer casing, and they decided just to extend that to the large ones as well. So they'll be phased in, obviously, over a period, but eventually all the lithium-ion batteries should have their watt-hour ratings marked on them, which will, of course, make deciding how to ship them very much easier. You won't have to be running around calling your supplier or looking for spec sheets. You can just look at the battery and it will tell you whether it is a high or low powered device. Some other ones, they made a change to one of the subparagraphs in section 173.185 on shipping lithium batteries. They were shipping lithium cells or batteries packed with, but not installed in equipment. They're in the same box as a piece of equipment they're going to power, but they're not yet in the equipment. It says they can either be placed in inner packagings that go inside an outer packaging, or they can be put in an inner packaging that goes in an outer packaging, but it must be within either the inner packaging or the outer packaging. Has to be a UN spec box rated for at least packing group 2. It may be a little bit complicated, but think that you're going to have the batteries in an inner packaging, and then the batteries plus the equipment in an outer box. And either the little box that the batteries are in should be UN spec, or the whole box containing the batteries plus equipment must be UN spec, if they are high powered. Now, this does not apply to the low powered batteries, which never require UN spec packaging. There's a limit to the number of larger cells or batteries. Again, these would be the high-powered ones in the package when transported by air. Again, this is to harmonize more with the IATA and IATA rules, that if you're shipping batteries packed with equipment by air, the maximum number of batteries or cells you can put in the box with the equipment is enough to power it once, plus 2 sets of spares, which by my math would work out to be 3 complete sets of batteries. Any more than that, and it would have to be treated as shipping standalone batteries. For the low-powered or small lithium batteries, one important update, if you look at the air regulations of ICAO and the International Air Transport Association, the IATA Dangerous Goods regulations, they break their high and low powered batteries down into what they call Section 1, which are the high powered, and Section 2, which are the low powered. At least that was the way it was originally done. And prior to this is the way the US regs look at it. If you're shipping low-powered lithium batteries going by air, you could use these Section 2 rules, which are very straightforward. Basically, you're just going to need the lithium battery mark on the package and a cargo aircraft only label if they're standalone. But for standalone batteries, in the last UN cycle, the air regs got rid of Section 2 for standalones, and they replaced it with something called 1B, which is an upgraded level of protection where they will have to be identified with a Class 9 label as well as the lithium battery mark, and they will have to go on a dangerous goods shipping document. HM215Q will amend the low power battery section to reflect that if they're standalone low power batteries going by air, they must be prepared according to the rules given in Section 1B in the ICAO technical instructions. Another thing that I'm glad they did address, if you looked at a hazardous materials handling mark, you will notice that it has a place to put the UN number for your batteries, and then what they called a telephone number for more information. But unfortunately, the UN never really explained what this other or more information was supposed to be. It seemed like it didn't have to be a 24-hour number. There was no mention it had to provide comprehensive emergency response. So nobody was really sure, even the regulators in the United States and Canada, what we needed to do with this number. So, since a lot of questions are sent back to the UN, what did you mean by this? They eventually decided that they were going to get rid of it. And the idea was that they would phase it out. So the UN said, okay, from this point on, you may have the telephone number on the mark, but it will not be required up until the end of 2026. Then when we start 2027, the number must be gone. So it will allow you to use up pre-printed stock, but again, starting 2027, we would need to make sure that the telephone number actually was not present on the mark. And there has been some concern in the US because they had to sort of come out with the DOT had to make an official announcement that they were, if they hadn't got the regulations amended in time, that they weren't really enforcing that the telephone number had to be there. But 215Q will make that official. Right now, the telephone number will now be optional in the United States and must be removed by the end of 2026. Canada, unfortunately, has still not really addressed it, so we'll have to see what Transport Canada does as we get closer to that date. They also put in a rule that says packages must be capable of withstanding a 3-meter stacking test for 24 hours for the low-powered lithium batteries, just to make sure that they will not crush easily or otherwise be damaged. And they're phasing out the term, which you may see in some sections, battery assemblies, because in the regulations, an individual electrochemical unit, say a AA cell, will be called a cell. It's one unit. It's not connected to any other cells. And basically, as it is, electricity isn't going to flow. If you take multiple cells and connect them together, that is, apparently, according to the engineers at the UN, a battery to create a little bit of what they thought might be clarity. In some cases, they refer to these as battery assemblies, as in assemblies of cells make up a battery. But they figured that the term battery assemblies was just really, it was just saying battery. So they're just going to go now with cells and batteries and get rid of the term where it's found, battery assemblies. It's not really changing what you have to do. It's just how they're explaining what you have to do. Something that there's a lot of interest in health and safety circles nowadays is coming up with new methods of testing for health hazards that avoid animal testing and all the ethical issues that go along with that. So the UN has adopted, and the DOT is now accepting a new skin corrosion test based on the OECD test number 439 called in vitro skin irritation using reconstructed human epidermis test method. So again, this would be specific guidelines for a laboratory test where you could use human skin. And I must admit, I haven't read the test guidelines, but presumably not attached to a human, probably cadaver skin. And that could be used not only for things like OSHA to determine can it cause skin irritation, but it should tell you whether it can cause skin corrosion, which is what is relevant for transport. One issue, though, with this is that it's a yes or no test. It doesn't give degrees of corrosion. So it tells you either it is a corrosive to skin or it's not. And most tests that they reference will allow you to break it down into, is it packing group 1 corrosive, very corrosive, 2 moderately corrosive, or 3 just a minor corrosive. This method, it will tell you it's class 8, corrosive to skin, but it will not give you the packing group. So they said, if you don't do any further testing or calculations to determine the packing group, if you're just basing it on this test number 439, you must put it in packing group 1 if there's no evidence that it is less corrosive than that. And again, that can be sometimes quite a hassle because packing group 1 is obviously going to be the most restrictive way of shipping hazmat. They also made a clarification to section 173.167, which talks about an air shipping description called consumer commodity. Now, the DOT once had something called consumer commodity, which is a completely different thing, and it's been eliminated. So the U.S. consumer commodities, which are sometimes called ORMDs, they're gone. But for air, there is a shipping name, consumer commodity, with an identification number ID 8000, and a class is 9, that allow you to take multiple small inner containers of certain different classes and ship them as if they're all one product. So, for example, you might have, say, a bottle of a flammable liquid and a small non-toxic aerosol and some alcohol wipes. You could put them all in one box and just call them consumer commodity. If they were consumer type products, they were within certain size limits, and they would all be classed as just class 9. So this has been rewritten for 215Q to make it clear that it may be shipped as a limited quantity by all modes of transport, but if you are using this, it must be capable of being shipped by air. In other words, the very strict provisions in the air regulations will apply even if you intend to send them by ground, just in case somebody gets confused and puts it on a plane by mistake. So you're going to call it ID 8000, it has to be at least suitable for air transport. And they've made a change in section 175.10 to update some of the rules to the current ICAO standards for hazardous materials carried by passenger crew when they're battery-powered mobility aids, such as scooters or electric wheelchairs. So again, they just want to make sure that the U.S. legal requirements were the same as what ICAO was asking for, so that there was no confusion for the airlines. Again, articles, there have been some revisions to articles containing larger amounts of hazardous materials to match the current ICAO technical instructions. So if you are shipping articles with hazmat inside, this can make your life a little bit simpler. They revised the table on substances that require control and emergency temperatures. Just very minor revisions. They've added one new formula, a new type of product that's on the market that will have to be shipped with control and emergency temperatures. And apparently somebody noticed one of the chemical names on the table was incorrect, so that has been corrected for this edition. The organic peroxide table for classifying organic peroxides based on their formulas, that has been updated again to reflect that there's some new formulations for organic peroxides that are now more commonly on the market. Back in 2017, they put in 4 entries for what they call polymerizing substances. They're hazardous because they could start to polymerize, generating heat, causing pressure increases, and basically causing a risk during transportation. Those are put in kind of temporarily, but they've been now made permanent. And you may have noticed in the international regulations, there's a new entry for cobalt dihydroxide powder. This material, when it's a very fine dust, is highly toxic when inhaled. So it's been given its own shipping name and the UN number 3550. So that has been added to the hazmat table in this rule. There's been a clarification to section 173.4b, which talks about shipping things as de minimis. Basically, this is very, very small amounts of product, normally 1 milliliter or 1 gram per inner container or less, and allowing them to be shipped almost as if they are non-regulated. They have clarified that the limits for formaldehyde in this section can also be applied to biological specimens which have been preserved with a very, very tiny amount of formaldehyde. So that's the final rule. They've just come out with a notice of proposed rulemaking. Again, this means it is not a final version. It is a proposal for public comment. But in the United States, if you ship hazardous materials that meet certain criteria, such as you ever send out shipments that require placards, you have to register with the DOT so that they know you're there. They basically know you're involved in hazmat shipments, and they also charge a fee. The fee will be set in the regulations, and it is supposed to be earmarked specifically for hazmat programs and development. It doesn't go into the government general funds, but this proposed rule would increase the fees. For small businesses, it would be significant, but not overwhelming. From $125 now per year to $375. For larger businesses, it could go from about $400 up to $3,000, which is a little bit more of a significant increase. But of course, we are talking about large corporations where this would probably not be a significant extra outlay. So not written yet. Don't panic or start smashing your piggy banks. but presumably they feel that they do need to generate a little bit more revenue for these hazmat programs. So as everything goes up in price, so I would expect this will get passed and there will be an increase. But again, you do have your chance to make comments during the comment period on this. And normally they'll give you 60 days. This was published at the end of May. So if you do feel that these fees are outrageous, you do have a chance to make your voice heard. For those of us in Canada, remember this will not apply to Canadian shippers unless you have facilities in the United States that ship hazmat themselves. They're also looking at making the fee payment system electronic only, so it'll all be done online, and to allow carriers who have to carry a copy of their certification with them, to allow them either to have it in hard copy or say be saved in electronic form, perhaps on their smartphones. Again, if you want to take a look at the NPRM, you can take a look at here at this link. So that's the United States. A lot happening there with 215Q. Now, Canada, I have heard through the grapevine that things are slowing down a bit, and honestly, they weren't going terribly fast to begin with. But again, they did, back in 2023, put out this proposed timeline for things that they wanted to get done. They did bring out this, what they call miscellaneous amendment, just make some minor changes and corrections. And in the fall of 2023, they came out with these site registration requirements. I've gone over it before, but I will mention it again in a slide or two. Then they are currently working on what they call the Canadian update, which they're looking at having the final rule for that in sometime probably fall next year. And they're also looking at harmonization, just like the US was. They did bring out what they call a Canada Gazette 1, which is our notice of proposed rulemaking, that to get us a look at what they're originally talking about. Right now, they're doing what they call informal consultation. They're talking to stakeholders and trying to get more feedback, and they're hoping to get this sometime in the first half of 2025. Again, I really hope that one of the things they have in here is addressing the disappearance of the telephone number on the hazardous materials or on the lithium battery handling mark. There's also, we're expecting a Canada Gazette 1 sometime next year of a provision on remotely piloted aircraft, such as drones, and allowing them to make limited dangerous goods deliveries. So this is what's on Transport Canada's plate right now. So the Canadian update, they did publish it, and we've talked about it in previous sections, published back December 9th, 2023. The official comment period is over, but Transport Canada, if you do have comments, it doesn't hurt to send them to them, even if it's outside the official period. They just can't promise that they'll get around to be able to reviewing them fully and incorporating any changes. But you know, you can send it in, and hopefully they could go say, oh, right, that's a good idea, and we can incorporate it before we bring out the Gazette 2 version, which was when it becomes the final rule. Just for those of you who haven't heard, they did bring out last October a final rule, a Canada Gazette 2 publication of a requirement for site registration. Similar in many ways to what the United States has. However, the good news is that they have not fixed any fees. So you would have to register, and that should be done within a year of the publication of the rule. So that would be October 25th this year. if you ship any dangerous goods that are not going under an exemption. So, for example, if you had low-powered lithium batteries or uh, limited quantities, they would not qualify for registration. But if you ship anything that is fully regulated, then you would need to register and tell Transport Canada that you're doing these types of shipments. Let them know what modes you're using and what classes you transport. So there's not an awful lot to it. It's just letting Transport Canada know who the stakeholders are in Canada by getting these people registered. You can find this in the regulations. They added a new part to the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Regulations, Part 17. And as you can see in the link I've shown here, there is a lot of guidance as well as a link to the online portal at this link here from Transport Canada on their client identification database page on their website. Little outside TDG and Transport Canada, but these things are dangerous goods, so I thought I'd mention them. There has been an amendment to the explosives regulations, published in Canada Gazette 2, which means it's finalized, published end of May. So if you deal with Class 1 explosives, you should take a look at these. They're not necessarily only dealing with transport here, but there'll be a number of updates in here, which are important for explosive shippers to know. They say it is intended to increase security and safety of explosive transport, storage, and handling while reducing the regulatory burden on stakeholders. Also, with Class 1 explosives, they have updated the packaging standard. In Canada, we do packaging standards a little bit different than the United States and most other regulations. If you go to Part 5 in TDG, instead of going through all the details on how to package everything, Part 5 simply references to outside sources. And for explosives, they tell you take a look at Canadian standard from the Canadian General Standards Board 43.151. And these standards are reviewed and updated periodically, again, to make sure that they reflect the most current state of knowledge and also reflect UN updates. So if you need to take a look, these are free. One of the nice things is that the CGSB standards now are normally a free download. If you go to this site on publications.gc.ca, you can link to the CGSB, look for 43.151, and you can download it as a PDF. Now, internationally, we are in a bit of a lull because UN and related regulations, such as the air and marine regulations, go on a 2-year cycle. And it starts in the odd-numbered years, goes through to the even-numbered years. So we're coming up to the end of what they call the UN biennium. So there are a lot of changes being made right now. Publications have been out for about a year or so, or longer, and they should have any corrections or last-minute changes that didn't get into the book. They should have been mentioned already. I did find, though, that IATA did issue a minor, what they call addendum, with some changes, particularly dealing with operator variations, which can change on a regular basis. So different airlines may have informed IATA that they've got new rules. There was an addendum issued, and it is available on the IATA website now, or you can take a look on our website. We'll have it available for download as well. Or if you have the electronic version of the IATA book, which I strongly recommend, if an electronic version would be good for you, they will just push the updates to you automatically. You don't even have to go and download them. You'll just wake up one day, open your IATA electronic version, and it will tell you there's been a change incorporated. Okay, so the last area we want to talk about is health and safety. And with great joy, I can announce that OSHA has finally published their final rule to update the Hazard Communication Standard, 1900.1200, to reflect revisions found in Revision 7 of the Globally Harmonized System, the Purple Book internationally, and even including some revisions from Revision 8. So even looking a little bit ahead. So this is important because Canada has already incorporated these, and we were starting to look at a unfortunate situation where maybe Canada had moved ahead, the United States had not, and it would bring in a lot of disharmony in hazard communication between Canada and the United States. So if you want to take a look at the final rule, there is a link again for the final rule that was published May 20th. Again, free PDF, you can download it or read it online. Now, this will become effective July 19th, 2024, and they'll have a phase-in. If some of you have been in this business for a while and you remember the original introduction of the GHS into the hazard communication standard, the US did a phase-in where, first of all, they said people who manufacture and sell pure chemicals must update their system first, and then people who are making mixtures based on those chemicals can take the updated information and update their information. So if you are selling chemical substances to workplaces in the United States, then you must be in compliance by January 19th, 2026. But if you're selling mixtures, you have a 3-year transition period, must be in compliance by July 19th, 2027. So that gives you about 18 months after the chemical substances must be in compliance. So what are some of the changes that we'll notice under these new rules? They have changed some of the definitions, introduced new ones, such as terms such as immediate outer package, and talking about things how you have to provide information when the product is, quote, released for shipment. So it's ready to be shipped out, even if it hasn't been transported yet. They do clarify that labels must include both a U.S. address and a U.S. telephone number for the distributor, whether they're an American manufacturer or they're an importer who's reselling it in the United States. There must be an American name and address on the label somewhere. They did a significant amount of work on clarifying what if you're shipping products not in normal bottles, drums, pails, and so forth, but you are sending them in bulk containers, such as tank trucks. You don't really have a container to put the label on that you're going to leave behind. So they've addressed how to transmit the label requirements to bulk container shipments. So if you're a bulk shipper, this is something you need to take a look at. Not really a change, but clarification that if you have a package that is showing both DOT transport labels and an OSHA label, if you've got a symbol that's similar in both transport, like a skull and crossbones, and on the OSHA label, you don't have to have that symbol appearing twice. So if you have a skull and crossbones as a transport label, you have the option not to put it on your OSHA label, which sometimes is important if you're trying to save space. They include the option not to relabel packages awaiting further distribution. So maybe you've got some stuff already in your warehouse that was labeled under the old rules. You don't want to have to rip all the old labels off and stick new ones on, but they'll allow you to For labels awaiting further distribution, you can simply send copies of the updated labels along with the shipment and request that the user put the labels on themselves. A bit of a significant change in the basics of classification, extending it somewhat. There's a new statement that says the hazard classification of your substance shall include any hazards associated with the chemical's intrinsic properties, and this now includes even if they occur based on a change of the chemical's physical form or chemical reaction products associated with known or reasonably anticipated uses of the product. So, for example, you might have a product that you feel isn't all that hazardous as it's sitting in the package, but maybe when people start to work with it, maybe they're heating it or they're mixing it with other products or doing something else, it may start to release other chemicals that may have their own health effects. So that now must be considered in the classification, even if it's not an intrinsic property of the chemical. You have to consider, is it changing its form, or is it reacting and producing these secondary reaction products? Some specific classification changes. They've got a new hazard class called desensitized explosives. They've revamped aerosols. They've changed it from being, used to be the class was flammable aerosols, now it's just aerosols. And we'll have categories for highly flammable, moderately or mildly flammable, and non-flammable aerosols. And they put new categories in under flammable gases as well. Pyrophoric gas used to be a separate class. Now it's been demoted to a category under gases as a whole. So the category flammable gases has two subcategories, 1A and 1B now. New provisions for testing for skin irritation and skin corrosion. Again, we want to get away as far as possible from having to do unpleasant, painful tests on live animals to determine skin effects. So these were actually in revision 8 rather than revision 7, but OSHA figured better be proactive about this and incorporated them in. So if you want to use these non-live animal test methods for classifying something as a skin irritant or a skin corrosive, you're authorized to do it now. They added a clarification on the term nuisance particulates. These would be some sort of dust. Again, inhaling any sort of dust can be from a nuisance to could cause breathing difficulties. But they've added a clarification that nuisance particulates can be considered to be not regulated only if you can establish that they do not pose any physical hazard, health hazard, or any other hazard, such as being a combustible dust. So if you want to classify it as a nuisance particulate and therefore non-regulated, you have to prove that it just doesn't have any other hazard. And they've also brought in a classification for substances that are corrosive to the respiratory tract when inhaled. We already had one for things which are irritating to the respiratory tract, and that would be where these things would likely have been put previously, but they've decided to divide it between genuinely just irritating and those that can actually start to corrode your respiratory passages, such as maybe hydrochloric acid mist. One thing that a lot of suppliers will be happy to see is they finally addressed, what if you have a tiny little package that a full-size label will not fit? Because GHS labels can have a lot of text that you have to put on them, as well as symbols that must be shown. So they've come up with provisions. If your bottle is not more than 100 milliliters, which is going to be a little bit more than 3 ounces. You need to have your product identifier, the name of the product, the symbols or pictograms, the signal word, which is danger if they're high hazard and warning if they're low hazard, manufacturer, distributor's name and telephone number, and a statement that full information on this product can be found in the outer packaging that these small inner containers arrived in. So you have, say, a box with a bunch of little bottles. You'd have a full label on the box, but you'd have this reduced information on the inner bottles. Now, what you're skipping here is you don't have to put the worded hazard statements or precautionary statements. So most of the text is gone, just the name, the symbols, one word, danger or hazard, and the manufacturer or distributor information. And then if you've got really, really small packagings, 3 milliliters or less, they originally said, okay, well, you could try maybe tying a tag onto them, or have something that maybe you can just put a little sticker on and then it's a tag that's attached. But sometimes you've got these very, very small vials or containers, and trying to put any sort of label on them like that would just interfere with how they're used. Maybe they have to be inserted into a piece of equipment. So if they're 3 milliliters or less, and putting things like tags on just will not allow them to be used the way they should be used, then they just need something which it has the product identifier on it, and that's it. They've updated the hazard statements and precautionary statements to match GHS Revision 7. Not a lot there, but there have been some tweaks to some of the statements. They will allow specific concentration ranges to be displayed on safety data sheets, and they have given a little bit more explanation about trade secrets, that the supplier can conceal the exact concentration or concentration range as a trade secret if, on request by OSHA, the supplier can provide adequate justification. So you don't have to tell them in advance, but if they come and ask you to prove it, you could prove how much money you spent to develop this product and how much you would lose if somebody stole your formula. A unique identifier and its source must be indicated when a hazardous ingredient CAS number is unavailable or a trade secret. And basically all SDSs will have to be updated for minor formatting, including in Section 9 physical properties, they are adding a new heading, particle characteristics. And even if you don't have anything to say here, you must have this subheading, and if necessary, say something like not available or not applicable. So you can't just ignore it on the grounds that, oh, my product is a liquid, it isn't a particle in the first place. You'll have to add that heading to your safety data sheets. So all the safety data sheets will have to be tweaked and revised by the due dates. One last one. Again, Canada has made these changes, very similar changes already, but I did notice that if you're in the province of Ontario, the Ontario Minister of Labour is doing 2 inspection blitz campaigns over the next year. One is looking at materials handling, where movement of the material being lifted, carried, or moved could put workers at risk of injury. And they're also going to be inspecting for occupational hygiene, such as doing air sampling and making sure that you're staying within legally permitted exposure limits in the workplace. Also looking at WHMIS training. So if you are a little bit behind in your WHMIS training or your records aren't so great, I would recommend do a refresher. Be able to prove to the ministry that you have done your training and your workers are familiar with everything under WHMIS. One last thing I want to mention is the 2024 Emergency Response Guidebook has been published. It is now out in both electronic and hard copy. If you want to look at ICC's website to buy a hard copy, there's a link. You can go to our publications page and order it. They are quite inexpensive. They are supported by the North American governments, so they are not going to be as expensive as you might expect a paperback book would be. You can also get electronic versions, but I always like to have a hard copy available just in case of things like power failures. Changes that have been made, they've updated the list of dangerous goods or hazardous materials. They've expanded the guides, updated the identification charts, more information on a more common type of accident over the past few years, electric vehicle fires. And we've got some specific information on chemical warfare and biochemical agents. And if you want to report things, a QR code that you can just scan and it will take it to your country's site for reporting hazmat or dangerous goods incidents, which is quite nice. So again, there's a summary of changes on Transport Canada's website you may want to take a look at. Keep in mind that ICC has lots of resources. Please feel free to check out our website. If you go to our help center, we've got lots of articles on various issues. We have a chat that you can use if you have questions, if you're a customer of ours, and you can sign up for our compliance bulletin, which will make you aware of when changes are coming. So please check us out there. And now is our question period. So, questions, we always get questions about copies of the presentation. We don't send out the presentation as a electronic file, but we do send out the link. So you can see the recordings, you can watch them again, or you can share them with people at work. That will be emailed next week. Question here, Dominic says no more rabbits. Probably there will still be some animal testing, but yeah, we want to save the rabbits. We don't want to cause any unnecessary suffering. So again, there's been a lot of work into non-animal testing that's been developed. Let's see if we've got anything else. So I've got a question here from Paula. ID 8000 shipped as LQ. Is air paperwork going to be required? I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't think you would need a shipper's declaration for dangerous goods, but you might. I'd have to go back and look at it specifically to see whether you would need anything more than just a normal non-hazmat document, because in general, limited quantities going by ground are not classified as requiring shipping papers. But yeah, I would have to take a look whether you may still have to provide hazmat documentation with that. Dominic asks, what is happening to Canadian competency-based training? Well, yes, what is happening? Apparently, from what I heard is that when they came out with the Canada Gazette version, lots and lots of people said they hated it. It got a rather negative reception. I think there's some good things in the standard. There are also some things that I thought were needlessly complicated and would increase expenses. So I can understand why they got some pushback. So they were supposed to be working in the first half of this year on a white paper to sort of do a study of where we are now and what they think needs to be done to get this into a usable standard that could be put into the regulations without causing unnecessary hardship on Canadian companies. So the first Canada Gazette, I think you can forget about that. They're going to issue a new Canada Gazette one once they've got all their studies done. And then if that gets a better reception, then we'll go to Canada Gazette 2 eventually. Anonymous also said there is no mention of an update to TDG Part 6 coming in 2025. Just wondering if that has changed. That's basically the same question as Dominic. And the answer is, yeah, a lot has changed. They discovered that there was a lot of objection to those changes to Part 6, and their decision was that they were going to go back, take another look at it, and hopefully come up with a system that would be more suitable to what we need. Some other questions we've got here. If you're using an existing lithium battery mark with the phone number, do you actually need to put the phone number on the mark any longer? Basically, if you're going by air or by ocean, no, you don't. If you're going under ICAO IATA for air or IMDG for ocean, they've made it optional, and this 215Q in the United States has now made that option. If you're in Canada, the situation is not quite as clear, but they have not officially taken it out or given any time period over which it's going to be phased out. That is probably going to come when they get the Air Harmonization Amendment done. So for the time being, I'm recommending people in Canada that either you include the telephone number or if you really don't want to and it's messing up your system, go to Transport Canada, see if you can get a special permit that would allow you not to put the telephone number in, even though it's still in the regulations. And that should be able to cover you until Transport Canada gets those changes made. Somebody says, do you know when OSHA update 1900.1200 with the new final rule is coming? Also, the OSHA briefs and the OSHA quick cards. Well, we went over the OSHA update. I'm not entirely sure. I don't have any time periods on the OSHA briefs and quick cards. But again, if you want to send me an email after it, I can look it up for you and see if I can get you that information. Again, should mention that if you need to contact us, my email is barbara.foster@thecompliancecenter.com. So everything else there is just the links. Pam and Kelly, did you notice any questions I didn't get around to?
There's one more at the bottom, Barb.
At the very bottom. Will the Federal Motor Carriers Safety Administration now allow carrying registration electronically? Well, currently they do not, that is correct, but they want to move into making it at least an option. So that's why it is a notice of proposed rulemaking. Again, that's just the hazmat registration. It's not necessarily your hazmat endorsement, but if this amendment goes through as intended, you would be able to carry your hazmat registration as a carrier electronically rather than in hard copy. But we'll have to see how that, what the comments are. I'm going to assume that probably people will be in favor of it. And in most emergencies, I mean, even if your phone got smashed, I don't think knowing that you're registered or not is going to be critical to emergency response. So it's really more for inspections, just to make sure you are in compliance with the registration rules. So I would assume that if PHMSA makes that change, FMCSA will accept it. We'll have to see how that amendment proceeds through the amendment process. Anything else? If not, I'm sorry I ran a little bit over time, but we did have a lot to cover today. 2 big amendments from the United States. And I hope you found it useful. And we will be, of course, doing another one of these in September, I believe. Or July, August. I think end of August or early September. Pam or Kelly, do you know?
It'll be in September.
September, okay. So as the song goes, we'll see you in September. And I hope you found it useful. And please let us know if you have any follow-up questions. And remember, you will be getting the link to this presentation, which you can review or you can share with people that you feel it would be helpful for them to take a look at this. So that will come to you in your email in a couple of days. So I'd like to thank everyone again We really appreciate your support for these webinars, and as long as people are coming, we will try and provide you the information you need. So have a good afternoon and a good weekend coming up, and enjoy your summer.